I know for our next film, we might spoil the fuck out of it. So we'll go as long as we can without taking that swing at it. But Gavin, we were really lucky on Sunday. We got to see Hamnet, the new Chloe Zhao movie, early. Do you want to tell people a little bit about it?
Yeah, 100%. So we are going to talk about Hamnet. We'll try not to spoil it for the first 5 or 10 minutes, but I feel like to properly discuss this movie and to articulate some of my specific criticisms of it, we are going to have to get into some spoiler territory in the second half of this film. So if you're really excited for Hamnet, probably, might not be a great idea to watch this review, this segment, whatever. But yeah, we did have the chance to see Hamnet early. There was a screening in Kansas City that we were able to attend. It was a couple days ago, and you can tell it was an early screening because there's this guy sitting by the studio who, before the movie starts, he had to remind us about 6 times to turn off your phone when the film starts and keep it turned off while the film is playing, please. The studio does not want this film to be recorded, and it does not want any of this to get out there on social media or whatever the guy said. But he said it over and over again, and it really made it feel like an exclusive early access screening, which it was. But yeah, we had to sit there with our phones off. We couldn't record any of the film, obviously. Um, but yeah, we had a chance to see Hamnet, before most people. And the reason why so many people are talking about this movie is because it's a huge Best Picture contender. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a front runner right now, but it might as well be in that front runner status alongside One Battle After Another and Marty Supreme. Hamnet's won a bunch of awards at various important film festivals. The main actress in the movie, Jessie Buckley, is basically a lock to win the lead actress Academy Award. She really doesn't have any competition. If you want to, yeah, she's fantastic in the movie. She totally deserves it. But that's basically a lock. If you want to put some money on Jessie Buckley winning lead actress, might want to do that now because I don't see anyone taking it away from her. Either way, this movie is a huge awards season darling, in large part because of the fact that Chloe Zhao won Best Picture a couple years ago with Nomadland back in the pandemic era. And this is her follow up, not to that, but actually Eternals, which was a huge flop she made for Marvel. And luckily, it seems like she's returned, from that career low, that total flop. Eternals with Hamnet, which kind of goes back to her roots more as an art house filmmaker. And this film obviously is about William Shakespeare and the relationship with his wife, played by Jessie Buckley, and about their son, Hamnet, who ultimately played a big role in inspiring the play Hamlet by William Shakespeare. And, it's unclear to me how much of this is actually based on, real history. I know it's based on a book. Obviously, a lot about William Shakespeare's life is up for debate, and people discuss, the extent to which, he was even a real person, yada, yada, yada. But still, I thought this was a pretty interesting look at the life and relationship of William Shakespeare and his wife, Agnes. I thought it was an interesting movie. Zach, what did you think?
Yeah, I thought there was a lot to love about this movie. This was actually the first Chloe Zhao film I've ever seen. I was excited to get introduced to her work. Nomadland kind of passed me by when it came out, and I am just a huge Marvel hater, so there was no chance I was going to go see that, regardless of how well it performed at the box office. And Hamnet kind of arrives at an interesting time to be released, Gavin. It comes out, I think, in a week and a half or so, wide released across the country. And we just had a really good conversation on this live stream about how dramas starring well-known prominent actors have been struggling. This is a drama starring, I would say, fewer well-known prominent actors. Obviously, Paul Mescal is a known guy, but I wouldn't go so far as to call him a Leonardo DiCaprio style superstar, right? So it more of a historical drama, a period piece. So I'll be really interested to see how it performs at the box office. I think the demographics that are going to be most likely to see this film and attend it are going to really enjoy it. I think that there's a lot of incredible cinematography of the English countryside. I think that the craftsmanship when it comes to the set designs and when it comes to the costuming are all ornate, intricate, and incredible. I think that's where Chloe Zhao really shines. And it honestly is perplexing to me that she ever went and made a Marvel movie. I'm not familiar with the Nomadland that much, but it seems like a complete misuse and waste of her talents. I always hate to see people with a real vision, people with a real eye for cinema go and get lost in the studio machine. So maybe it's all for the better that that film was a disaster and she was able to make this Overall, I felt like I agree with you, Gavin. A very interesting spin on Shakespearean period piece, right? It's a lot more about his wife Agnes than I think a lot of people might realize going in. And before we spoil any of it, I think it's a female cast that really dominates, right? I'm not the biggest Paul Mescal guy. I think he's perfectly serviceable in this film. I think he's perfectly fine. But Jessie Buckley and Emily Watson, who plays Shakespeare's mother, Mary Shakespeare, I think just completely steal the show. I was reading about Emily Watson. Apparently, she began her acting career in Shakespearean plays for the Royal Shakespeare Troupe in England, where she, did touring Shakespeare productions for decades before having any mainstream Hollywood success. You could see that she was really comfortable in that world. And I thought that for all of those elements of the film, outside of the script, which we'll get into, all very, very flawlessly done.
Oh yeah, 100%. The craft in this film is incredible. The costume design is beautiful. The cinematography is amazing. I can tell that Chloe Zhao was quite inspired by Robert Eggers, in my opinion,
Yes.
with this film. There's a lot of kind of witchy imagery and the implication of a lot of sort of like witchy activity with this main character played by Jessie Buckley. I really enjoyed a lot of those aspects of the movie. And ultimately, I really enjoyed the first half of this film a lot. I thought it was really a great dynamic between Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal, playing obviously Shakespeare and his wife. I really enjoyed seeing their relationship form and them get together. I thought that they had great on-screen chemistry and a really interesting kind of character dynamic that you don't see a lot when it comes to stories about people falling in love. To be honest, I liked the first half of this film so much that the second half to me felt like a pretty big fall off, despite the fact that that's what most people are talking about. I feel like with this movie, and that's where Hamnet, really comes into play. The titular son of William Shakespeare, who I don't want to spoil what happens, but plays a big role in the life of his wife, and then ultimately in the creation of the play Hamlet. I thought that stuff was fine. But to be honest, this movie did kind of fall off for me as soon as Shakespeare himself kind of leaves the picture. I guess we can start getting into light spoilers now. So again, if you want to see this movie, you probably really shouldn't be watching this anymore. But there's a point about halfway through the film where Shakespeare basically leaves and he goes off to London, leaving his wife with the kids in the countryside. And at that point, I don't know, it just kind of lost my interest a little bit. I found myself getting a little bit bored at times. I found it, to get a little bit repetitive and monotonous. And also, it's not necessarily this movie's fault. It's not at all this movie's fault. But the second half of this film really becomes a drama about motherhood and about some of the kind of psychological horror of motherhood. And this is like the third film this year which tackles that topic specifically, and not just the psychological trauma of motherhood, but specifically with an absent father or a father that's like increasingly distant from the situation. In addition to Die My Love and If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, I feel like this film was kind of covering familiar ground at this point, ground that I'd already seen, multiple other movies this year covered pretty decently. So to me, I was kind of like, all right, here we go again. This is, I guess, the direction we're going in, and that is absolutely the direction that the film stays in for the remainder of its runtime. And again, it's not bad or anything, but I felt that a lot of what I thought was truly interesting about this movie was that chemistry and relationship between Shakespeare and his wife. And when it just became more about the motherhood stuff, I don't know, I kind of lost interest. Obviously, motherhood is not a topic that I can really relate to much as a man in my 20s. It's not something that's impacted my life very much, having kids and stuff. So maybe it's more of a personal thing. But do you agree with that at all?
I actually have a different take because I actually didn't mind it at all. I wasn't super impressed by Paul Mescal, so when he left for London, it didn't really dissuade me. One of the things that I found most interesting about this was the fact that it did so much exploring the psychological trauma of the Agnes character, and I wish that the film would have stayed more locked into that. That would be my critique, because I thought that it did such a really interesting job of laying the groundwork. Obviously, I completely agree. It was inspired by Eggers and the kind of impact he's had in doing these kinds of English pieces. He's just such a master of them. I think anybody who watches them would take something away from that. But I liked the fact that it was really investing in the fact that this is a film that is going to give credence to what I will dare I say more mystical views. Right. I liked the idea that it was really playing up this element of the forest as a to me like an example of the timelessness of Shakespeare's work and how the things that are happening right now are laying the roots for things that would be timeless later on. And the fact that we don't even consider Agnes, if she even existed, or the son of Shakespeare. We just think of it as this amorphous work of literary, or not literary, but technically, but like playwright genius, of stage genius. And I liked all of that. The big whole, obviously, the fact that there was the parallels between the fact that once she was removed and unable to give birth in her natural habitat of the wilderness, and where her people were come stripped of her, connection to her ancestry and her roots, that it led to problems. It was the same way that her mother died. I thought all of that was very, very interesting. I was less interested in any of the Paul Mescal actual Shakespeare stuff. I thought that the sequences where we see him actually engaging in direction, or actually, doing his work at the Globe, I found all the moments where she tries to like have him come up with the lines that we are all familiar with when it comes to Shakespeare came across a lot more like fan service, when he's like, to be or not to be, or when he's like coming up with a line.
But that's after he leaves. That's why I'm saying all the best stuff is before he leaves, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I liked some of the dreamier sequences, and I thought the child actor that plays the young Hamnet was really compelling. I thought that there was good stuff and good dynamic between the mother and the Agnes and Mary Shakespeare. I thought they had a really interesting dynamic after he left, and some of the traumatic experiences that she has when he's left and like not there for the second childbirth. I think the second childbirth is one of the strongest sequences in the movie for me. So those were the things that I found really compelling about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do disagree with you about Paul Mescal. I thought he was fantastic in the film. I wasn't a big fan of him in Gladiator 2, but I really do think he excelled in this role. I agree with some of the fan servicey writing referencing the Shakespeare bits, but I didn't really think that was his fault. I thought that he did a great job with the material given to him. And again, I thought he had really interesting chemistry with Jessie Buckley when they're first meeting, and he's kind of like seducing her, trying to get her to fall in love with him and stuff. Like, I thought that was really well played, interesting character dynamics. And then again, we're going to get into straight up spoiler territory now, because I really can't talk about this next thing without basically spoiling the movie. But to what I don't really understand about this film is like it wants to be so much about the Jessie Buckley character, but then at the end of the film it puts so much emphasis on the fact that Shakespeare himself has created this play about his son, but we never actually really get to see much of his creative process. And then at the end, when Jessie Buckley's character, his wife, is so moved by the fact that he's created this piece of art about their son, to me it felt, I didn't really understand what the movie was trying to say, because she knows he's a writer. She supposedly, theoretically, part of the reason why she fell in love with him is because of the fact that he's this artist. There's scenes of her trying to like help him with his creative process and everything. But then at the end, she's so flabbergasted by the fact that he's like capable of making art or whatever. And to me, it would have been a lot more interesting to see the actual creation of that play through the psychology of Shakespeare's eyes than like his wife at home dealing with their sick kid or whatever. Which I thought was well acted. It was well filmed and all that stuff, but I just didn't really get like this whole revelation at the end. They're like, oh, my husband, who I encouraged to leave the farm to go to London, has been working on a play, and it's about our son. Like, what? It just felt totally out of nowhere, and I didn't really understand what this emotional punchline was intending.
For me, and obviously, like, everybody would have their own interpretation, but to me, I thought that it was the culmination of all of the suffering that she had been through, right? Because she did love that he was a genius, and she did know what he was capable of, and she'd made so many sacrifices, and she'd been so devastated, and she'd spent so much time alone, that the fact that she was able to stand there and be so profoundly impacted by the work that her husband had made, and the fact that it was him synthesizing and processing his grief, and that it had turned into something so, spectacular, it was just this incredibly emotional moment to see him accomplish that, and to see the role that she had played in being the sacrifice, to being the unspoken element of Shakespeare. And I think that's kind of the point that Chloé Zhao was going for me, was that this is the story of everything that you don't know about Shakespeare. And that's why I just found all the Shakespeare stuff to be less interesting. I think she could have gone even more whole hog. Let's learn even more about Agnes. Let's make this even more about Agnes, because I think the whole point of the movie for me was that it was to celebrate this component, this integral part of the partnership. The only reason that Shakespeare was able to become Shakespeare was because he had this relationship with Agnes, and they went through this tragedy together. So we're on the
But they don't go through it together, and she's barely even in the play. She has nothing to do with the play.
What do you mean they didn't go through it together? The death of
That
his
she
son?
keeps, yeah, she keeps. That's the whole thing. She keeps, scolding him for not having been there at the moment it happened.
Well, it's projection, obviously, but I think that that's why she's so emotional at the end. Is that is that it's the turmoil and the like the conflicting things, like the fact that they went through it. Like there's no like they were both the parents of the child that perished, so they're always like essentially bound and going through that together. And so she's so hurt by the fact that he leaves and that he doesn't say, I'm going to choose you and my family over this. However, by the end, when she sees this is the culmination of all of his work, there's a sense of catharsis, there's a sense of mutual
Right.
understanding that he had to go through this and she had to go through this, and so now they can begin the process of
Yeah.
healing.
No, that is 100% the point. I just didn't really I just didn't really feel the impact from it because of the fact that, for one, she sends him to London. She's the one that insists that he go there, and then she's the one that refuses to move there.
But that's her sacrifice.
I mean, sure, but it just, to me, it felt a little bit weird for her to like turn on him in that way, and then all of a sudden change her mind because of the fact that he was doing the thing that she already knew he was doing, and that she theoretically fell in love with him because he was able to do, which was write a freaking play or make art or whatever. So to me, it just kind of felt flat, and I don't know, it just felt like it was, and I just felt like it kept making the same point over and over at the end. But I mean, that's a fair interpretation. I don't know. To me, I felt like there was a lot more that could have actually been uh, gleaned from the actual writing of Hamlet and not just what we got instead.
Yeah, personally, that's actually it's interesting that you read that differently, because to me that's the best part of the movie, is that it's not just another remake of like, oh, let's watch this guy Shakespeare who's famous like write Hamlet, but let's
Does
learn.
that exist?
I mean, that's the kind of style that I feel like is a recipe for like a tired biopic that's going to be Oscar bait. Whereas this is like a unique perspective. This is somebody who toiled and sacrificed for Shakespeare. This is one of the people that we've never heard about. And it is a unique, interesting perspective. And I think that the fact that, Shakespeare, had he not gone through those tragedies in his life, he would have never produced Hamlet. And the relationship dynamics, the fact that she was looking after his children while he was out going to do these things, that's allowed him to engage in fatherhood, that allowed him to have all of these emotional moments that he had to create Hamlet, right? And the fact that she was hurt by the fact that he'd chosen to leave her, but the fact that what he made was so powerful and so healing for him as someone who loved him. She was able to come around on all of that and really feel the power and feel the and understand the fact that he had to do this, and that she had to be in the role that she was in for this to happen. And it played the role of like an interesting interpretation to me of a historical moment, where it's like it's about the historical moment that produced William Shakespeare
No,
writing.
I mean, I understand that like the perspective of the movie is about her. I get that. I'm critiquing the fact that I don't think it really ultimately worked for me. At least I
Right.
felt that
I'm
at
just
the
justifying that I love that about it.
No, that's totally fair. Obviously, you're in the majority. Most people feel that way. I'm just saying that, in my opinion, the film is at its strongest when it's about her relationship with William Shakespeare, and not about what happens after he leaves. In my opinion, the film got significantly less interesting, and it got kind of tedious and monotonous, and like something that I've already seen before. So yeah, that's kind of how I felt about it. But I definitely see the point behind it.
Yeah, and I loved it, and I thought that the point
Did
was
you?
so.
When we were out of the theater, you were trashing it.
No,
It's
I
kind of interesting that you're like, what changed?
well, I haven't gotten to the part where I was like really frustrated by it. And that's what I mentioned earlier, which is that I don't like all the stuff where it makes it really about William Shakespeare. I don't like the fact that we go back to London and we spend the last 30 minutes of the movie basically just going to the Globe to watch Hamlet. And I think it's a really clumsy and
Well,
poor
that's the whole part you
performance
were
of
just
Hamlet.
defending.
No, no, no. You
The whole scene at the end is what I'm talking about. Is this culmination that doesn't work? And you
okay?
just defended it and said it did work.
Okay. Well, what I was saying was is that the emotional moment worked for me. What I didn't like was like I like the idea of that, but what I didn't like was actually watching Hamlet be unfolded. Is that what you were having a beef with? That's my.
Yes, because she's standing there watching Hamlet and acting so shocked by the fact that her husband wrote a play about something that impacted him in his personal life.
Well, I like that
And
about it.
that
What
seems obvious to me, and like just again presented as this super dramatic revelation, when to me it didn't really make sense, because it was like, yeah, obviously he's been writing plays, she knows he writes plays, she knows he makes art, she knows he's a playwright. Why is she acting so shocked by the fact that he incorporated this real life tragedy into his art, when, yeah, obviously he's going to incorporate his real life into his art? It just to me it felt like just again this overly dramatic revelation of something that shouldn't have been that big of a revelation in the first place, and it didn't really make what had preceded it feel like it was worth it. I don't know.
I think we're articulating two different criticisms, though. I liked the idea that she was moved at the end by his work. I just don't think we needed to see all of that. I think that because it was about her, I didn't need to go and watch him direct the actors. I didn't need to go watch him stand in front of the thing and say to be or not to
I mean,
be.
it is about her, but it also literally ends with her watching his play.
And I would have
Like,
liked for her
how
to.
is it about her if it ends with her just watching Shakespeare?
Well, yeah, but like when you watch the whole performance of Hamlet, like they have the youngest kid who is the one that passes away and inspires Hamlet, like his real life older brother goes on and is like Hamlet in the film, and we watch him perform Hamlet, and there's this big whole like sword fight and all of these things happen, and I just think it makes the movie drag. What I think would have made a much more compelling bow on this movie is that if it was 25 minutes shorter and she goes to see his play after it's written, but we don't have to actually watch the play. I thought it was a really bad move to watch the play. I didn't love that she like does the whole thing where she's like shouting from the audience while he's doing it. That all I didn't think worked, and that was one of the things that left a really bad taste in my mouth. And I think it does commit the cardinal sin that we were talking about earlier in the live stream, that you can't take a climax like you can't beat me over the head for the last 20 minutes and make me watch a fucking stage play of Hamlet where I feel like the Hamlet kid doesn't even know what he's saying after I watched the what's his name, Paul Mezcal, be like, stop saying the words, like perform them. And then I watched the kid at the end who's supposedly directed to understand Hamlet, and he still feels like he's just reciting the words on stage in like a charismatic way, which I don't know what else you do when it's Shakespeare. But to me, that killed all the momentum. It felt like less good acting. And I was like, why are we just watching the play Hamlet? Because I thought that it killed a lot of the emotional momentum that could have been built if we just watch her go into the globe and then, leave again, or something like that, where we don't spend like 20 minutes watching what this guy's been working on. Because I didn't really care about that.
Interesting. Yeah. And again, I know it's based on a book that's about the woman, and it's a film by a female filmmaker. It's about the, more female side of this perspective. I genuinely would rather have watched a movie about Shakespeare in London writing Hamlet in the wake of his son dying. Because it's like, yeah, obviously any mother is going to be crushed by the death of her child. And we just have to watch that in like excruciating detail for like 45 minutes as she like, grieves her son and all this stuff. And then she gets to the Globe and she's like, oh yeah, Shakespeare just made this play about Hamlet. It's like, well, that would have been interesting to find out about. Like, he's apparently, up holed up in this little apartment, drinking a ton, writing. I'm like, okay, well, why didn't we find out about any of that? I just didn't find it super compelling to focus for like 45 minutes on this like brutal like grief and like post birth trauma and like all this stuff. Where again, it was well filmed, it was all well acted. I don't know, it just didn't connect with me as much. And then for the film to then culminate in being about Hamlet, not this woman, but about this fucking piece of art by Shakespeare, who has basically disappeared for the last 40 minutes and who keeps getting scolded for not having actually technically been there at the moment his son died. I don't know. It just felt like a weird, and overly dramatic sort of thing that, just didn't really translate to the screen in the way that I think it could have. And in the way that the first half really did for me.
Yeah. The other thing that really stuck in my craw was I thought they did a lot of really excellent work to build up this idea of like mysticism and this idea that like she's from the woods, and that like, you mentioned the Robert Eggers inspired witchcraft. Like one of the things that she does a lot of is she like goes in the wilderness and she'll like mix up different like potions or like different grub material. And I've interpreted that as like the film giving credence to these like mystic ideas, these like otherworldly sensations. Obviously, another spoiler alert is that like Hamlet, or the Hamnet character, like supposedly like sacrifices himself to death in a scene that could be interpreted in multiple different ways. But I thought was also adding credence to the fact that this was going to be like a more supernatural kind of a film. And that was one of the things that bummed me out. That was another strike for this film that we haven't gotten into, was I thought throughout it, it was really hinting at the fact that the latter stages of the film would be more supernatural. You have, what I mentioned, like the twin says to his sister, like, I'm gonna disguise us so that death takes me, and then he dies. You have her mixing up all the different potions. Obviously, it keeps going back to this imagery of a large hole at a tree trunk, which I thought was like roots imagery for sure, but I thought the film was positioning it in a way that was going to culminate in something supernatural and potentially positive at the end. And then it does the 30 minutes of the Hamlet play, and we never ever find anything else out about that. And that's where I really started to lose my temper in the movie, because I was like, why are we watching a play of Hamlet, which I just felt was pure fan service for everybody that wanted to see a little bit of Hamlet going into the movie. And I heed your point. It was supposed to be about like fucking Hamlet. But to me, we're so far into the movie and we've done so many other things. Like, why decide to go back and watch that? I was hoping for a more supernatural ending. And I would have been okay with something that even, completely like divorced itself from the realm of reality. But I thought that that was something that left me unsatisfied at the end, was the loose ends from all those things that I was really hoping, especially when the mother passed away because she was forced to give birth away from this sacred tree. Her child passes away because she gave birth to it away from this sacred tree, and then we don't ever find out anything more about this sacred tree again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have been more interesting if the film had followed those threads and culminated in something like that, rather than just returning to William Shakespeare and the actual play Hamlet. Which again, they basically just like stopping even including Shakespeare as a character halfway through the movie, even though in the first half of the film he is basically, I mean, he's almost just as much of the main character as his wife in the first half of the movie. But then when he leaves, maybe more, yeah. But then he leaves, and it just becomes 100% about her. But then it still ends with his play. So it's like, if anything, I think they should have been cutting back and forth between her experience and his experience for it to culminate in something like that. Or if they wanted to purely make it about her, yeah, it should have culminated in something like what you're talking about, where they kind of lean into those witchy elements and those threads that were being developed, rather than just cutting back to him and being like, oh yeah, he made a play, which everyone knew was happening and which is like kind of obvious. And everyone knows where this is going because it's called Hamnet, right? So like, I don't know. But again, I mean, I know that like some people are saying like, oh, this is how the book is or whatever. That's fine. But sometimes movies have to adapt books in a way that makes it work better for the screen. So I'm sure it does work perfectly fine in the book. This is just my opinion on the movie itself and how I would have fucking made it. Obviously, I'm not the director of this movie, but I still, I think people can have issues with it regardless of the book or whatever. But either way, I don't know. It's a little bit. I don't want to come off like I hated this movie. I really enjoyed a lot about it. I thought the acting was fantastic. I thought that even in some of those really intense, dramatic scenes that I thought were monotonous and tedious, Jessie Buckley still, delivering an incredible performance. Just a, totally incredible performance, and everything is really well done. I don't know. I just felt like in the second half of the movie, they really wanted me to care about this kid and the fact that he dies.
We agree that shit did not work.
And ultimately, I didn't care that much about the kid or the fact that he died. In fact, the only interesting thing about the fact that the kid died is the ways in which it inspired Hamlet. And none of that is addressed. None of that is talked about. It completely cuts away from that to just focus on the fact that, yeah, like any mother, you would be horrifically traumatized in the event that your child fucking dies in front of you or whatever, which yeah is well acted, and you get the intensity of the drama and the aggression and the emotion and the primal anguish. That's all really well captured. But again, maybe it's just because I've seen like 3 fucking movies that tackle very similar topics as this movie this year. Maybe if this was the only movie this year that I'd seen that tackles this exact topic, that it would have impacted me more. But again, having just seen Die My Love and having just seen If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, it just felt like more of the same, like another movie about a traumatized mother who's dealing with motherhood in the absence of the father figure. Which again, I just feel like it's been done so many times. And when this movie just became that again, I was like, all right, well, I guess we're doing that again. And then it never really did anything different or said anything all that interesting, in my opinion. And then, yeah, so I don't know. I guess I have jumbled mixed thoughts about this movie. I liked a lot about it, but ultimately I just don't really think it delivered in a truly satisfying way.
Yeah, I agree. It didn't deliver in a satisfying way. I think I like different elements of you. I thought that the birthing sequences and the sequences of the like maternal trauma were some of the strongest elements of it. For me, I felt the most like connected to the movie during those points, which is why I think I drifted a little bit away from the Paul Mescal stuff, because I do think the movie tried to make itself really romantic, and then it kind of removed itself tonally away from that, and then it when it circled back, it killed the emotional momentum by having us watch Hamlet for so long. And I liked the setup that she was going to be moved by the art that her husband made, and that was how it was going to reconnect them. But I thought it really killed the moment by beating around the bush. And as you mentioned, people in chat saying that, in the book, she goes back and watches it. I get it, but I would have just cut the actual watching it out of the movie from a film bro POV, and I would have circled back to some of the more supernatural elements that had been laid throughout the groundwork of the exposition and through the rising action of the film. Because I agree this film had problems. I felt like there were a lot of really emotional high points, so I'm with you that my review is going to be checkered. I definitely think if it sounds like the kind of movie you're going to like, you will like it, right? I would say if you're really into Shakespearean time period pieces, if you love watching people speak in that kind of lore and have the costuming and all of that, I think you'll have a really good time going to see it. But I have a hard time giving it higher than a 7 because there were some things about it at the end that just really left me annoyed.
Yeah, I would ultimately go for like a 6.5, 7 out of 10 as well. It's a really well done film. I agree that it really captures the period well. That's probably the best thing about this movie, and maybe also why I would have liked to see more of the actual Shakespeare writing Hamlet stuff, because I really just did enjoy the time period of the film and that sort of world that it was recreating. And there's not a lot of good movies about actually about Shakespeare. I don't know if I can't even think of a single one that actually is about William Shakespeare. And again, I thought this movie did a really good job of kind of recreating the world in which he lived and came out of, and his family and all that kind of stuff. If you're at all into that time period, or if you're at all into Shakespeare, obviously this is 100% a must see. And I compared the style to Eggers. I think she's clearly inspired by Eggers here, and much like in an Eggers film, it all feels authentic to me, which is the best thing about a movie that takes place in an earlier time period. Sometimes when you watch a movie that takes place in like the fucking 1700s or the 1800s or whatever, you can just tell the actors are acting. You can just tell it's like a modern dude who was just looking at an iPhone 5 seconds ago, but now he's pretending to be speaking in this dialect and stuff. And I think Chloé Zhao actually does a great job, much like Eggers, again, actually transporting you there, making you feel like you're actually watching, something from that era. The vocal dialect and the all that kind of attention to detail is really there. Same within the production design, and it feels like a lived-in world. It doesn't feel too glossy. It doesn't feel too well produced. So all of that stuff is on point. And the acting is fantastic. And I'm mostly just nitpicking the second half of this film, maybe because I've seen a lot of similar movies hit similar beats this year. And I'm kind of getting to the point where it's like, yeah, I get it. I get this point. But other than that, I thought this was definitely worth seeing. And that first half specifically, I thought was just sublime.
Yeah, I think the last note I'll have is because Chloe Zhao and because people like Robert Eggers do such an incredible job of immersing you in that world. I mean, Nosferatu, The Witch, come to mind immediately as like the benchmarks for how you could execute this. I mean, cinema hasn't been the same since The Witch came out when it comes to a period piece like that. I was mind blown by Robert Eggers. I was like, holy shit, how did he write this? And everybody, I think, had that reaction. But the fact that it's so natural and effortless was what really pissed me off. And I don't mean to harp on this too much, but this is like my big fucking issue with the movie was the last like 20 fucking minutes where I just watched some stupid kid that I don't think is that impressive of an actor go and do Hamlet, and he feels like all of the mistakes. Like he seems like a kid, blonde hair, could have been looking at an iPhone 20 fucking minutes ago, and now he's on stage in this movie where I'm watching like less charismatic actors do like what I understand Shakespeare to be in my judgmental brain. Whereas like this was more like an invitation back to that time period, and like I'm gonna authentically tell you a story, because I do think Shakespeare, when you read it, like again, I'm not trying to sound like a dummy, but it's like, okay, this is like a little bit like not how anybody talks. And when I watch a play, I kind of even if even like in comparison to like The Witch, right? They're not like saying sonnets to one another. Like it's not supposed to be poetry. It's just like how people would have talked at that time. And I think that's another layer that makes the actual Shakespeare stuff on screen just not really jive with me. I don't know. It's weird to say that I watched this movie that's like a Shakespeare movie, and the things that I didn't like about it were when it tried to get into Shakespeare, but that was just kind of how I felt.
Yeah, that's interesting, huh? I mean, I definitely agree that last scene goes on for too long. But again, I also would have liked to see more of that stuff as far as the actual artistic process. Like, I think there would be a really interesting movie to be made here about the artistic process and what it looked like to create art back in that time with those perimeters and in that context. Like, I do think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. But yeah, I do agree they hold on that last shot for way too long. And it goes on for way too long, and it just makes the same point over and over and over again visually, which is that she's so moved by the fact that her playwright husband wrote a play, and it's just like, all right, we get it. But yeah, I think that George says, I'm not sure I'm picking up the Eggers comparisons. Wait till you see the movie, bro. Eggers is all over this thing, from the aesthetic to the witchiness to the whole the whole sequence of the death of the son feels right out of The Witch, where the the plague stuff and the the almost like the fucking kid almost dying and shit like that. So yeah, very clearly Eggers inspired, but
Also, I don't think Jacob Elordi's in it unless I missed him.
I didn't. Yeah, I didn't see him.
Yeah. Maybe he's looked a little different since Frankenstein. No, I'm kidding. I don't think Jacob Elordi's in it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that's in reference to, but yeah, and again, I actually did think Paul Mescal did a really good job here. I thought he was charismatic and kind of funny, and I like the fact that. And this is another thing that I'm struggling with this movie on. We can cut this out of the clip because we've been rambling for
Oh
so
no,
long at this
it's
point.
good discourse.
But it was like I like the fact that they didn't just make him like this like asshole deadbeat absent father. It was more nuanced than that. But then it felt weird when she just like randomly like turned on him and started acting like he was a deadbeat absentee father. And it just kind of felt out of nowhere and like almost like they had to create drama so that that end revelation would feel powerful or whatever when she still moved. And to me, it just felt very forced. Where it's like these people actually loved each other. You can tell their relationship is authentic, and you can tell that she cares about his work, which is why she basically forces him to leave and go to London so that he can actually be free and create his plays. Then there's a whole scene that goes out of their way to specify that she's the one preventing the family from moving to be with him in London.
Well, because she's afraid of her daughter dying.
Yeah, fair, but I still just find that then for her to go out of her way to turn on him and act like he's this piece of shit because he couldn't get there on time to be there for his son's unexpected death that he obviously had no idea was going to happen. So then it kind of turns into this weird like relationship drama, but again, it seems forced and it doesn't really seem in line with her character. And I know trauma obviously makes you do things, and if you're grieving the death of your son, you're likely to lash out at even loved ones that don't deserve it. So maybe that was the point. But to me, it just felt it felt forced, and it felt like out of nowhere, not really in line with her character, and only there to create this sort of drama in order to make it seem like this powerful revelation that actually he did care. Like, oh, he wasn't just freaking jerking off in London. He was actually doing what he said he was doing the whole time and writing this play. Like, yeah, no shit. The film never gives you any reason to believe otherwise. It never paints him as a scumbag. It never paints him as like someone who's out there cheating on his wife or something. He clearly cares about her. So to me, that just felt a little bit out of nowhere and contrived. And it could have been explored interesting in a way that felt more nuanced. But to me, it just felt underdeveloped. And then like it didn't really warrant the payoff that you get in spades.
Yeah, I think that one of the I guess the best way for me to articulate what I think, especially after listening to your take on it, and then I should say I talked to Salisa, my partner, a lot after the movie. She absolutely fucking adored this film. So if I sound like I was like full throatedly defending it, you could probably trace a little bit of her and I's conversations to that. But I think that this film suffers from the fact that it does seem like it's two films trying to be one film. And I think you can take that away clearly by like what I saw in the movie, and like what I attached to was to me like the most riveting and visceral part of it, which was the I'm fucking traumatized shit. And Gavin went in and it was like, this is the Shakespearean movie that I've gone to see. And you connected more to, I want to see Paul Mescal and the relationship dynamic that he has with this woman. And it did seem a little bit like it could have gone and been two different movies. Like one is a really, really like, Agnes forward, like exploration, which takes some cues from her relationship with Shakespeare, but it's more about witchcraft and her connection to the forest and what the woman experience was like in the Yorkshire of fucking England at that time. And then also a movie about Shakespeare who's making Hamlet. And I think it tries to marry those two. And maybe the book does a better job about it because the book can be more expansive and the book could decide to oscillate between perspectives in a way that this doesn't. There's a lot of narrative tricks that you have at your disposal as a novelist. But I think this movie suffers from the fact that it is like it almost like it feels like two diverging films. And it's like a choose your own adventure, like what you decide is your favorite part of it. And that's why it's fractured, right? Like it got, Gavin and I were like, did you love that part or did you hate that part? It's like I like this part of that part, but I wish they were doing this with that part instead. And so it's like fuck. And honestly, in a way that's similar to what we've talked about with Keeper, right? There's so much like obvious talent there that when you see the director do something that you feel like is a misstep, you're like, fuck, man, this could have been really, really special. At least this is how I'm like kind of grappling with it.
Yeah, totally. I think that's 100% on point. And yeah, I would have been more forgiving of the decision to focus less on William Shakespeare if the whole film hadn't just culminated in this like what big reveal that he wrote
20
Hamlet
minutes.
and Hamlet was inspired by Hamnet. Like, yeah, I think everyone in the audience already put that together by the time it's like presented as this big shocking like fucking revelation or whatever. Again, it's just fucking obvious. Even in the first like frame of the movie, they're like Hamnet is Hamlet. Like that's literally the first thing you see on the screen. So you kind of know where it's going. You're like, okay, he's gonna write fucking Hamlet. And then it's like, all right, he did it. He did the thing, and now I'm supposed to be like mind blown or something. Like I just and after like completely, abandoning his perspective and refusing to give us any insight into his grief, like we don't really get any understanding of that whatsoever. But then we're supposed to care deeply about this work of art that he created. So it's like, what the fuck is this movie about him or her? Like, why am I supposed to care so much about what he's been doing when the movie just completely obscured his perspective? And instead, I don't know. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I didn't get the idea, George, but that's just the way I interpreted the film. And I would be interested in yours if you see it when you get around to it.
Yeah, I think that no, I think that that's probably true. That's why I didn't really like the Paul Mescal stuff as much, because I didn't think that the film was like tonally like coaching you to care as much about him. I mean, obviously, given the fact that he fucks off for the latter part of the movie. But yeah, like I said, there's moments of this that I felt were really, really powerful and really visceral. And I think the two biggest takeaways that I have was I thought that Jessie Buckley and Emily Watson were stars. And I would be shocked if both of them don't receive Academy Award nominations. And as Gavin mentioned, Jessie Buckley probably set to win. Honestly, I wouldn't be mad if Emily Watson wins Best Supporting Actress too. I thought she was damn good in this. But I'd have to look at, all of the, supporting actress roles.
I think Tiana Taylor is definitely gonna be a front runner in that
will be a
category. But I totally agree with you. The Emily Watson performance is fantastic. I definitely enjoyed Hamnet. I wasn't trying to come off like I was too hard on it. I did overall enjoy it. It definitely worth seeing on a big screen. There's some fantastic acting that really does deserve to be seen on the biggest screen possible. So yeah, check it out.